Have you ever wondered what truly happens when you completely vanish from someone's life? Not a slow fade, not a momentary break, but a full and complete disappearance. No texts, no calls, no explanations. In a world where people take others for granted every single day, what if you flipped the script? What if, instead of fighting for attention, you became a ghost, unreachable, untouchable? The truth is, people only appreciate something when it's no longer within their grasp. They assume you'll always be there, answering their messages, putting in the effort, making their life more comfortable. But when you remove yourself, when you walk away without a word, the effect is far more powerful than any confrontation, any argument, or any desperate plea for their attention. Welcome to the most important video you'll watch today. If you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or treated as an afterthought, this is for you. Today we're diving deep into what happens when you vanish completely from someone's life, the emotional roller coaster they experience, the stages they go through, and why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply disappear. By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychological impact your absence has on them. You'll see why silence is more effective than words, why distance creates desire, and why people often realize your value only after they've lost you. And trust me, when that realization hits, it changes everything. If you're ready to step into your power, drop a comment below saying, "I'm done being taken for granted," because after this you'll never allow yourself to be treated as an option again. Stay with me until the end, because there's a final stage they go through that most people never talk about, and it will change the way you see relationships forever. Now let's begin. The moment you disappear, the game changes. You were always there, always available, always putting in the effort. They assumed your presence was permanent, a given, something they never had to question. But now, for the first time, they are forced to face a reality they never anticipated. You're gone. At first, they brush it off. Maybe you're just busy. Maybe you need a little space. They tell themselves it's nothing. But deep down, something doesn't feel right. There's a shift in the dynamic they've always relied on. And as the hours turn into days, the realization starts creeping in. You're not coming back. That's when it begins. The shock of rejection. The first thing they feel when you disappear is rejection, but not just any kind of rejection. This is a deep, unsettling kind, the kind that shakes their perception of control. People don't like to admit it, but when they know someone is always there, they take them for granted. You were the constant in their life, the one who always answered, always showed up, always cared. Now you're gone. No explanation, no argument, no grand exit, just silence. And that silence is louder than any words you could have spoken. Rejection is a psychological trigger. When someone loses something they assumed was secure, their mind goes into panic mode. They start replaying moments, analyzing past interactions, trying to pinpoint where they lost you. The confidence they once had, the belief that they could always reach you, that you'd always be there, crumbles under the weight of uncertainty. This stage is crucial. If you've ever been tempted to announce your departure, to send a final message explaining why you're walking away, don't. The power lies in the mystery. When you disappear without a trace, they are left to fill in the blanks themselves. And the human mind, when faced with the unknown, often creates far worse scenarios than reality. The growing void at first, they convince themselves that they don't care. I'll be fine, they think. They'll come back. But as the days go by, something changes. Their routine feels off. The small details that once seemed insignificant suddenly stand out. The way you used to check in, the random jokes, the effortless way you made their life more comfortable. They assumed they could replace your presence, that your absence wouldn't really matter. But now they're realizing the truth. You were irreplaceable. People like to believe that relationships, friendships, and connections are interchangeable. They tell themselves that if one person leaves, someone else will fill the space. But human bonds don't work like that. When you disappear, they don't just lose you, they lose everything you brought into their life. And here's the part they never saw coming. The emptiness grows. They try to distract themselves. They go out, meet new people, throw themselves into work. But no matter what they do, there's a nagging feeling they can't shake. Something is missing. That something is you. This is where the real psychological weight starts pressing down. The absence you created isn't just physical, it's emotional. You didn't just walk away. You removed the emotional safety net they had taken for granted. The spiral of curiosity, once the emptiness sets in, the questions begin. Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? This is the stage where their mind starts running wild. The mystery surrounding your absence becomes an obsession. Curiosity is one of the most powerful emotional drivers. People can handle rejection, they can even handle loss, but they can't handle the unknown. They start searching for signs, checking your social media, asking mutual friends, looking for any clue about what's happening in your life. And if they can't find anything, that's when the obsession truly kicks in. They might start crafting scenarios in their head. Maybe you've moved on. Maybe you're thriving without them. Maybe, just maybe, you never needed them as much as they thought. That thought, it terrifies them. This is why it's crucial that when you disappear, you leave no breadcrumbs. No cryptic posts, no indirect messages, no casual check-ins. The more they search and find nothing, the more their mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. And here's the best part. The less they know, the more they want to know. The regret phase, by now they've been in their own head for far too long. The silence is unbearable. The lack of answers is driving them crazy. And that's when they start doing something they never expected, reflecting on their actions. Did I push them away? Was I too distant? Did I take them for granted? Regret is a brutal emotion. It forces people to confront truths they've been avoiding. They start replaying old conversations, searching for the moment they lost. They remember the times they ignored your messages, dismissed your feelings, or treated you like an option instead of a priority. And here's the irony. They may have convinced themselves they didn't need you, but now all they want is another chance. This is where they truly start feeling the weight of their own mistakes. When you were there, they assumed they had control, but your absence has shattered that illusion. Now they realize that you weren't just another person in their life. You were the person who brought value, stability, and depth. And they lost that. The urge to reach out. This is the moment where desperation starts creeping in. They need to know if it's too late. They might test the waters with a simple message. Hey, how have you been? Or maybe something more direct. I've been thinking about you. But here's the key. You hold all the power now. If you respond, the dynamic resets. The chase ends. The lesson is incomplete. But if you remain silent, that's when the real shift happens. They go from curiosity to full-blown pursuit. They start strategizing, thinking of ways to get your attention. Maybe they start liking old posts. Maybe they show up where they know you'll be. Maybe they even send a long emotional message admitting they were wrong. The irony. Everything they do now is what you once did for them. They've gone from taking you for granted to desperately trying to reclaim you. And you? You're no longer playing the game. The power of your absence. At this stage, the tables have turned completely. You were once the one putting in effort, waiting for responses, hoping to be seen. Now, they are the ones feeling that exact same uncertainty. And here's the truth. The more they feel your absence, the more they value your presence. People don't appreciate consistency. They don't value what is always available. But take it away, it becomes priceless. This is why disappearing isn't just about walking away. It's about shifting the power dynamic entirely. It's about teaching them, without a single word, that you were never an option to be taken for granted. And now, for the first time, they finally see it. The shift is undeniable now. What started as a minor inconvenience in their mind has grown into something much bigger, a psychological storm they can't escape. They told themselves they wouldn't care, that they'd move on easily, that your absence was irrelevant. But the reality unfolding before them is completely different. Their emotions are spiraling, their thoughts are racing, and the realization that you're really gone is hitting them harder than they ever expected. And the worst part? There's nothing they can do about it. The illusion of control begins to crumble. People like to believe they have control over their relationships, their emotions, and their influence over others. But when you disappear, you strip them of that illusion. They thought they had power over the dynamic between you. They assumed you would always be there, that your affection was guaranteed, that no matter how they treated you, you would always return. Now the tables have turned completely. They're no longer the ones dictating the pace of the relationship. You are. And the worst part for them, they have no way of stopping it. That's when the panic starts to set in. The unshakable void. At this stage, they're beginning to notice just how deeply your presence was woven into their daily life. The small, seemingly insignificant things, the texts, the check-ins, the way you made them feel important, are now glaring holes they can't fill. They try to distract themselves, but it's not working. The void you left isn't just an empty space, it's a constant reminder of what they lost. They begin to replay old conversations in their head, searching for clues. Did I push them away? Were they waiting for me to show more effort? Was there a final moment that made them decide to leave? These questions consume them, gnawing at their confidence. They might try to convince themselves that they don't care, but the truth is becoming impossible to ignore. You mattered more than they ever realized, and now you're gone. The search for closure. This is when they start looking for answers. The not knowing is driving them insane. They check your social media, they ask mutual friends about you, they try to find anything, any small clue that will give them a sense of control again. But there's nothing. You've gone completely off the grid. No updates, no vague posts, no signals that they can interpret, and that's when the worst thought of all enters their mind. Maybe they've moved on. This is their greatest fear. Because if you've moved on, that means they were never as important to you as they believed. It means that while they were busy taking you for granted, you were becoming someone who no longer needed them. They can't handle that thought. It's too much, and that's when their emotions start turning against them. The desperation for validation. At this point, the balance of power has completely shifted. They went from feeling in control to feeling completely powerless, and now they need to know that they still matter to you. So they start testing the waters. A random like on one of your old posts. A short, meaningless text. Hey, how have you been? A comment on something that isn't even about them, just to see if you'll react. They are desperately trying to get your attention without admitting that they miss you. But here's the most important part. You don't respond. Not because you're playing games, not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you genuinely don't need their validation anymore. And this is where their internal battle begins. The fight between pride and regret. They don't want to admit it, but deep down, they know they made a mistake. They know they took you for granted. They know they didn't appreciate you when they had the chance. And now, as much as they want to believe they can move on, their emotions aren't letting them. But here's the problem. They also have their pride. They don't want to be the first to break. They don't want to admit they miss you. They don't want to come crawling back. So they fight it. They tell themselves, if they really cared, they'd reach out. I'm not going to be the one who gives in first. They'll come back eventually. I just need to wait. But as the days pass, their confidence starts to crack. Because deep down they know you're not coming back. The emotional breakdown. At this point, their emotions become too heavy to ignore. The reality of what they've lost becomes crystal clear. And suddenly, everything else, the pride, the excuses, the distractions, falls apart. This is when they start thinking about reaching out for real. Not just subtle hints or casual texts, but a full-blown message admitting that they were wrong. Some of the most common messages at this stage? I've been thinking about you a lot. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until now. These messages are a last attempt to regain control. But here's where you hold the ultimate power. You choose whether or not they get closure. The ultimate realization at this stage, they've gone through every emotional phase: shock, regret, curiosity, panic, desperation, and now, for the first time, They fully understand what you meant to them. They finally see you as the person who added value to their life, who made them feel safe, who was irreplaceable. But now they've lost that. This is when the regret becomes permanent. This is when they realize that they had something truly special and they let it slip through their fingers. This is when they finally understand what you were worth. But by the time they reach this stage, it's already too late. Because you've already moved on. At this point, their world is no longer the same. What started as a mild inconvenience, the assumption that your silence was temporary, has evolved into something much bigger, something they never expected, a full-blown crisis of self-worth. This is when the emotional weight becomes unbearable. They thought they could move on easily. They convinced themselves they were fine without you. But the more they try to escape the truth, the more it haunts them. The realization is sinking in, deeper than they ever imagined. They aren't just missing you anymore. They are questioning everything. The deep self-reflection begins. For the first time in a long time, they are forced to look inward. Before, it was easy to blame you. Easy to dismiss your absence as just another phase. Easy to tell themselves that you were the problem, that they were better off without you. But now there's no distraction strong enough to silence the one truth they can't ignore anymore. They were the reason you left. And that thought, it shatters them. They start replaying every interaction in their mind. Every time they ignored you, every time they pushed you away, every time they assumed you would always be there. Regret is a slow poison. It doesn't hit all at once. It builds. It lingers. It forces them to face memories they had buried deep, moments they once dismissed as insignificant but now define everything. The silence they once thought was a relief, it has become a prison. The absence they once welcomed, it has become a void they can't fill. And now, for the first time, they see things for what they really are. The urge to escape, their own thoughts. Self-reflection is painful. It's uncomfortable. It forces people to confront parts of themselves they would rather avoid. And that's why at this stage their first instinct isn't to fix things. It's to escape the weight of their own thoughts. They try everything, going out more often, meeting new people, throwing themselves into distractions, anything to silence the regret that is eating them alive. But no matter what they do, one fact remains. Nothing feels the same anymore. They thought moving on would be easy, that replacing you would be effortless, that time would make them forget. But instead, time has done the opposite. With each passing day, they are more aware of what they lost. Every new person they meet feels empty in comparison. Every distraction is temporary. Every attempt to escape only pulls them deeper into the reality they refuse to accept. The battle between ego and emotion, by now, two sides of them are at war. On one side, their ego is screaming. It refuses to admit defeat. It refuses to acknowledge that they need you. It refuses to let them be vulnerable. But on the other side, emotion is breaking them down piece by piece. Because no matter how much their pride tries to resist, the truth is undeniable. They want you back, and that's when the internal debate begins. Should they reach out? Should they apologize? Should they admit they were wrong? It's a painful dilemma. One part of them knows they need to swallow their pride and try to fix things. But the other part, the one still clinging to arrogance, tells them to wait, to pretend they don't care, to convince themselves that you'll be the one to come back first. But deep down, they know that won't happen. They feel it. For the first time ever, they are truly losing you. The fear of being forgotten. The realization hits like a wave. What if you're already moving on? What if they've already been replaced? What if you're happy without them? The thought terrifies them, because it forces them to confront a truth they never prepared for. They were never as important to you as they thought. This is where the anxiety sets in. They imagined that if you ever left, you would still linger in the background, that you would still check up on them, that eventually you'd come back. But now, they aren't so sure. Now, they realize something. they never considered before. Maybe you're not missing them at all. And that thought? That's the one they can't handle. The desperate need for reassurance. This is when the panic reaches its peak. They need to know if they still have any hold over you. They need reassurance. Not just that you remember them, but that you still feel something. So they start testing the waters in new ways. A random message, pretending to be casual, a sudden like on an old post, a comment meant to provoke a reaction. Each move is calculated. Each action is a desperate attempt to get any response from you. But here's where you hold all the power now. You don't respond. Not because you're being petty, not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you're different now. You see the pattern. You recognize the game. And this time, you're not playing. And that drives them completely insane. The crushing weight of silence was once something they welcomed. Now, it's their worst nightmare, because they know what it means. It means they've lost control. It means they no longer have power over you. It means you've moved on, and they are stuck exactly where they left you. They underestimated you. They assumed you would always be there, waiting, hoping, holding on. But instead, you became someone who no longer needed them. And now they are the ones feeling exactly what you once felt. The uncertainty, the ID, the regret, the desperate need for a response that will never come. And as much as they try to pretend otherwise, it's destroying them. The final realization by now, they've reached the final undeniable truth. This was never about you chasing them. This was never about you waiting for them to change. This was about you realizing your own worth, and that is something they can never take away from you again. At this point, they are no longer just experiencing fleeting moments of regret. They are drowning in it. The initial denial has faded. The temporary distractions no longer work. The people they thought would replace you feel empty, meaningless, and now, for the first time in a long time, they are forced to confront the truth. They made a mistake that cost them you. The weight of their own actions hits them. There's something uniquely painful about realizing you are the reason for your own suffering. Before, it was easy for them to blame you. Easy to convince themselves that you were just being dramatic, that you were overreacting, that you would come back eventually. But as time passes, those illusions start crumbling. They start to see the reality of their own behavior, the moments they dismissed your feelings, the times they took you for granted, the small acts of carelessness that slowly pushed you away. And now, they can't escape it anymore. They feel the weight of every ignored message. They hear the echo of every dismissive response. They relive every moment they assumed you would always be there. Only this time, there's no undoing it, no going back. And that realization, it breaks them. The desperation for a second chance. Now that regret has fully settled in, they become desperate for just one more opportunity to fix things. They start romanticizing the past, remembering only the best parts of your relationship. They convince themselves that what you had was special, that they just didn't appreciate it at the time. And now they are willing to do anything to get that feeling back. This is when the messages start to shift from casual to deeply emotional. I miss you. I've been thinking about everything. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until now. Each word is carefully chosen, a plea disguised as an apology. But here's the truth. They don't just want to reconnect. They want to erase their own guilt. They want to hear that it's okay, that you forgive them, that you still care. Because if you do, then they don't have to face the full weight of what they lost. But you don't give them that relief. Because for the first time, you see them for who they really are. The collapse of their defense mechanisms in the beginning, they were confident. They believed they could move on, that your absence wouldn't matter. They told themselves that you would be the one struggling, not them. But now, that confidence is gone. The games they used to play no longer work. The ego they clung to has been shattered. The power they once had is no longer theirs. And as much as they want to convince themselves otherwise, the truth is clear. They lost someone irreplaceable. And you are thriving without them. The need to prove they never cared. Now, faced with the full reality of their loss, they have two choices: accept their mistake and deal with the pain of losing you. Try to convince themselves and everyone else that they never cared in the first place. And since the first option requires emotional maturity, most people choose the second. They start posting more, going out more, making sure the world sees them as happy, thriving, completely unbothered. They create the illusion of having moved on, of having won the breakup, of being completely unaffected by your absence. But you see right through it. Because no one who is truly happy feels the need to prove it. No one who has moved on keeps checking your profile, watching your stories, asking mutual friends about you. Their entire act is built on one thing: trying to make you feel what they are feeling, but it doesn't work. Because you don't need their validation anymore, and that is what destroys them. The moment they realize it's over, this is where everything collapses. Because despite all their efforts, despite the fake happiness, the distractions, the social media games, nothing brings them peace. Nothing fills the void that your absence left behind. And then, one day, it hits them: you're never coming back. They aren't just losing you temporarily. They aren't just going through a rough patch. This is permanent. And when that realization sets in, the last shred of hope they were holding on to disappears completely. The final wall of denial shatters, and now for the first time they feel exactly what you once felt: the pain of being forgotten. The final stage: acceptance, but not peace. Eventually, after all the resistance, the mind does what it always does: it adapts. They stop reaching out. They stop expecting a response. They stop trying to fix what is beyond repair. But here's the key: they don't find peace. Because even though they finally accept that it's over, that you have moved on, that there's no way to undo the past, they will always carry the weight of what they lost. And that is the real consequence of taking someone for granted. Not just the temporary regret, not just the fleeting sadness, but the lifelong understanding that they had something real, special, and rare, and they threw it away. And the worst part? They will never find that again. Because no matter how much time passes, no matter how many new people they meet, you were one of a kind and now you're gone. At this point, they are no longer in denial. They no longer tell themselves that you'll come back. They no longer pretend that they never cared. Instead, they are left with a painful truth. They let something valuable slip through their fingers, and now they have to live with that. The realization that time won't fix this. In the past, they relied on time as their safety net. They assumed that given enough time, things would return to normal. That whatever distance had grown between you would eventually close. That one day, everything would go back to the way it used to be. But as the days pass, then weeks, then months, nothing changes. The distance only grows. The silence only deepens. The void only becomes more permanent. And for the first time, they understand: this isn't something time can fix. Time isn't healing this wound. It isn't making them forget. If anything, it's doing the opposite. It's making them realize just how much they lost. And now they are forced to face a reality they never prepared for. They will have to move forward without you. The search for closure. At this stage, they start searching for anything that will bring them closure. Not because closure will actually help them move on, but because they are desperate to escape the feeling of unfinished business. They tell themselves that if they can just get a final conversation, just one last interaction, just a single moment to rewrite the ending, they will feel better. So they start planning. Maybe they'll send a long, heartfelt message. Maybe they'll try to bump into you by accident. Maybe they'll ask a mutual friend to bring your name up in conversation. Anything to get some kind of reaction from you. But here's the truth they don't want to admit. Closure doesn't come from a conversation. It doesn't come from an apology. It doesn't come from hearing your voice one last time. It doesn't come from rehashing the past. Closure comes from accepting reality. And right now, they aren't ready to do that. The desperate need to reconnect as the weight of everything crashes down on them. They reach a breaking point. At first, they tried to be subtle, the casual texts, the random likes, the short, meaningless interactions designed to test the waters. But when none of that worked, they realized there's only one thing left to do. They have to lay everything on the table. This is when the long messages start coming in. I've been thinking about you a lot. I never got to tell you how much you meant to me. I wish I had done things differently. And in some cases, it's even more direct. I still love you. I want to see you. Can we talk? This is the final act of desperation. They know that if you don't respond now, you never will. So they put their pride aside. They throw caution to the wind. They say whatever they think might pull you back in, because the idea of you never being in their life again is too much for them to handle. The shift in your perspective. Here's the part they never expected. While they've been trapped in this emotional whirlwind, replaying memories, feeling regret, struggling with their pride, you've been moving forward. You've been healing. You've been growing. You've been stepping into a new version of yourself. And now when you look at them, you don't see them the same way anymore. The power dynamic has shifted completely. In the past, you might have waited for a message like this. You might have hoped they'd finally realize your worth. You might have fantasized about the day they'd come back. But now you see things clearly. They aren't reaching out because they suddenly became a better person. They aren't trying to reconnect because they've grown. They aren't admitting their mistakes because they've truly changed. They're reaching out because they lost control. And you no longer need them. The breaking point. This is when they reach their lowest emotional state, because for the first time, they realize that even if they want you back, it doesn't mean they can have you. And that's when the real pain begins, because this isn't about regret anymore. This isn't about missing you. This is about realizing they no longer have access to you. And that is a pain unlike anything they've ever felt before. Because the truth is, they never thought they'd actually lose you. They always assumed there would be a way back in. That no matter what happened, no matter how much time passed, no matter how much distance grew between you, they'd always have a second chance. But now, as they sit there staring at a message that will never get a reply, they understand something they never wanted to accept. Some losses are permanent, some people don't come back, and some mistakes can never be undone. The last attempt to regain control, in a final, desperate move, they try to rewrite the narrative. They don't want to be seen as the one who lost. They don't want to be the one who was left behind. So they do the only thing they can. They pretend they don't care. They start acting like they're better off without you, posting more, laughing louder, living a life designed to make it look like they are thriving. But you know the truth. Because if they had really moved on, they wouldn't need to prove it. If they were truly happy, they wouldn't need to broadcast it. If they no longer cared, they wouldn't still be thinking about you. And deep down, they know that too. The final acceptance eventually, after all the attempts to reconnect, after all the emotional highs and lows, after all the games and distractions, they accept it. Not because they've found peace, not because they've truly moved on, not because they've stopped missing you, but because they have no other choice. Because no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how much they try, you're gone. And now they have to live with that for good. At this point, they have exhausted every possible strategy. They've gone through the phases of denial, regret, and desperation. They've tried reaching out, subtly and directly. They've crafted messages in their mind 1,000 times, debating whether or not to send them. They've pretended to be fine, putting on a show for social media and mutual friends, but nothing has worked. Because nothing can undo what's already done. And now, for the first time, they must face the one thing they've been avoiding this entire time. The reality of living without you. The final collapse of their ego is a funny thing. It allows people to convince themselves of illusions, that they are in control, that they are the ones who set the rules, that they can always return to a place of comfort if things don't go as planned. But when faced with a reality that no longer caters to their ego, it collapses. They were convinced you'd always be there. They believed you'd eventually reach out. They assumed they could wait things out until you gave in. But none of that happened. Instead, You became someone they no longer recognize. And that's when the final blow lands, because now they have to admit something they never thought they would. They were wrong. Not just about you, not just about the relationship, but about who they thought they were. The crippling realization that they're replaceable. In the past, they saw themselves as irreplaceable in your life. They assumed that no matter what happened, no matter how much time passed, they would always hold a special place in your heart. But now they realize that they were just one chapter in your story, a chapter that has already ended. And worse, someone else will take their place. This is the most painful thought of all, because it forces them to see the brutal reality. You aren't sitting around reminiscing. You aren't waiting for them to come back. You aren't stuck in the past. You're moving forward. And eventually you will find someone who sees your worth from the beginning, someone who won't take you for granted, someone who won't need to lose you to realize your value. And that is something they can't handle. The guilt that never fades. By now, they've accepted the truth. You're never coming back. But here's the thing about mistakes. They don't just disappear. The regret they feel now, it's permanent. Because while they will eventually learn to live with the loss, they will never forget why they lost you. They will never forget the times they could have done better. They will never forget the moments when they should have chosen you but didn't. They will never forget the way they assumed you would always be there. And now, every time they think about you, they will be reminded of their own failure. That's the kind of guilt that doesn't go away. That lingers, that follows them through. Every relationship, every interaction, every moment where they start to take someone else for granted. Because deep down they know they had something rare and they threw it away. The silence that haunts them forever. Silence is a powerful thing. In the beginning, it was something they welcomed. They thought it meant freedom. They thought it meant control. They thought it meant that they were winning. But now, it's their greatest torment. Because every time they pick up their phone and resist the urge to text you, every time they scroll past a memory that reminds them of you, every time they hear your name and feel that familiar sting of regret, the silence is deafening. They will go on with their life. They will pretend they've moved on. They will meet new people, have new experiences, build new relationships. But nothing will ever feel the same. Because deep down, in the quietest moments, in the spaces where distractions no longer work, they will remember. They will remember you. They will remember what they lost. They will remember who they could have been if only they had chosen differently. And that is the real consequence of taking someone for granted. Not just the loss itself. Not just the pain of missing you. Not just the regret of what they could have done differently, but the lifelong realization that they had something real. And now, it's gone. At this point, they are no longer fighting against the reality of your absence. They are drowning in it. They don't try to convince themselves that you'll come back. They don't hold on to the illusion that time will fix things. They don't pretend that they never cared, because now all that's left is the truth. And that truth is unforgiving. The pain of knowing you've outgrown them. There's something uniquely devastating about watching someone you once took for granted become untouchable. And that's exactly what has happened. You've grown. You've changed. You've moved beyond the version of yourself that once would have waited for them. And the person they see now, they don't have access to anymore. That's when it hits them. They didn't just lose you, they lost the only version of you that would have cared. And now, even if they were given another chance, it wouldn't matter. Because the you they knew no longer exists, and that is the hardest thing for them to accept. The unanswered questions that will haunt them. When people lose something valuable, their mind searches for closure. They want answers. They want explanations. They want something that makes sense of what happened. But when you disappear completely, when you remove every possible way for them to find comfort in what-ifs, you leave them with something far worse. Questions that will never be answered. Did they ever really love me? Did I matter as much as I thought I did? Were they just waiting for an excuse to leave? Did they find someone better? These thoughts consume them because the unknown is unbearable. It forces them to create their own conclusions. It forces them to sit in their own regrets. It forces them to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you never needed them as much as they thought. And that possibility eats away at them every single day. The illusion of moving on. Eventually, they do what everyone does. They force themselves to move on. They build a new life. They tell themselves they're fine. But here's the truth. People don't move on from the things that change them. They don't forget the people who left an irreplaceable mark on their lives. They might distract themselves. They might convince themselves that they're over it. They might even find someone new. But deep down, you will always be there. Because the lessons they learned from losing you, they will carry those for the rest of their life. The subtle regret that never fades one day, long after they've stopped trying to reach you, long after they've accepted that you're never coming back, long after they've buried every trace of their past with you, something unexpected will happen. They'll hear a song that reminds them of you. They'll see someone who looks like you. They'll visit a place where you once spent time together, and in that moment, it will hit them all over again. The regret, the emptiness, the realization of what they had and lost. And for a brief second, they'll wonder, do they ever think about me? But they'll never ask, because deep down they already know the answer. You moved on, and they are just another lesson you left behind. And now, they are left with only one thing: the weight of their own actions. There is no more denial. There is no more waiting. There is no more pretending that things will ever go back to the way they were, because the truth is undeniable. You are gone. And they have to live with that. The final realization: they were the problem. For a long time, they convinced themselves that you were at fault, that you were too emotional, that you asked for too much, that you were the one who needed them more than they needed you. But now, in the silence of their own thoughts, they see things clearly. They remember the times you tried. They remember the moments when you fought for the relationship. They remember the efforts you made, the ones they ignored. And now, they understand. They didn't lose you. They pushed you away. And that realization, that is something they will never escape. The moment they finally let go. There will come a day when they stop waiting for you to reach out, when they stop checking to see if you've unblocked them, when they stop searching for signs that you still care, not because they want to, not because they've truly moved on, but because they have no other choice. They will force themselves to move forward. They will convince themselves that they are fine. They will build a new life even if deep down, something still feels incomplete. And maybe, just maybe, they will learn from this. Maybe they will treat the next person differently. Maybe they will cherish what they once took for granted. Maybe they will finally understand what real love requires. But even if they do, it will be too late for you. Because you have already moved on. The lesson they will never forget. They may never admit it to anyone. They may never tell their friends. They may never speak your name again. They may never show the world how much they still think about you. But deep down they will always remember. Because people don't forget the ones who changed them. And you changed them forever. Not by begging, not by chasing, not by proving your worth, but by walking away, by choosing yourself, by refusing to accept less than you deserve, by showing them without a single word that you were never an option. And now they understand that too late.